Hi everyone, I am Kim Marcourt, the Director of the Student Health Services Department. Happy to be here with you to discuss the impact of sleep. We're going to talk about our emotional health, our physical health, athletic performance. I will be joined by Jaya Roy, one of our wonderful mental health counselors, to get into this topic and give you some practical tips and tricks to improve your nighttime routine. So sleep is the golden chain that ties health and our bodies together. A quote by Thomas Dekker, and it's kind of this visual of health being something that's kind of outside and something that we have to go towards and move towards, and the sleep really being this tether that really brings it all together. And I know that might almost seem like an exaggeration, but I think we in fact underestimate the value of sleep and the importance of it for our overall health. And we're going to get into some of the health and wellness statistics, even longevity statistics that suggest that sleep is really, really vital for good health. So when we look for good sleep, we need to kind of set some criteria and see what we're really talking about. And we look at two things specifically. That is the sleep duration and the sleep quality. So many of you now that have maybe watches that monitor this while you're sleeping, and you know kind of some of these things because it can actually show you sleep cycles and of course the length of time you slept, but also how deeply you slept and for how long. So that 7 to 9 hour mark seems to be the sweet spot. People who chronically, again, we're talking about chronic sleep deprivation here, which is a real issue, ongoing, chronically get less than 7 hours of sleep a night. Seem to not do as well. And then over 9 hours, actually, on the other end of the spectrum, can also be indicative of some issues or can affect our health. We want to start looking at some other factors that might be contributing to your body needing more sleep than the average person, or that is normal. But that usually it's people sleeping less than 7 hours, which ends up being the issue. Now, there's certainly exceptions to this rule. There's that occasional person who seems to have great energy, sustained throughout the day, feel amazing with less than 7 hours of sleep a night. But again, those are the exceptions, not the rule. So we really, in general, want to shoot for that 7 to 9 hours, or at least give ourselves that much time to sleep. So quality, falling asleep, there's apps and tools now that we can use to try to fall asleep. And we are going to go into some of the sleep hygiene practices. Jaya will later in the slideshow, but falling asleep tends to be a real issue for people, and there's things that we can do to set ourselves up to be able to fall asleep with ease, and hopefully not medication. Staying asleep is definitely what I struggle with. So my body is ready to go after about 4 hours, it seems at times, but then ready for another nap, after being up for 2 or 3 hours. And so that is not ideal. So we want to figure out how to stay asleep. And being able to fall back asleep, this is really key. Things are going to happen in the night. Kids are going to need assistance. Our sleep partner might be moving or getting up to use the restroom. We might need to get up to use the restroom. So, being able to also implement things where we can train ourselves or easily be able to fall back asleep or not get too fully awake, or certainly not look at our phone while we're going to the bathroom and that kind of a thing, is really, really key in improving our sleep quality. So let's define what sleep deprivation is, what we're really talking about. And I've kind of discussed this a little bit as we go, but again, that less than 7 hour mark, and we focus on that piece more so than the greater than 9 hours, because really that seems to be the issue for most people, regularly sleeping less than 7 hours. It is dose dependent, right? So the greater the degree of deprivation, the greater the adverse effect on your health. And we're going to talk about what those things are. And then primary causes. So some things we can control and some things that we can't control. Certainly lifestyle and kind of physical environment and some sleep hygiene practices. Those are things we can control and we're going to talk about. But our occupation, of course, sometimes we cannot control the shifts that we work, shift hours. I worked 12-hour night shifts for 14 years. That certainly affected my sleep and circadian rhythm at that time and continues to years later. And some of these issues can evolve into actual sleep disorders where individuals have to retrain their body through a set of steps or a program, implementing a program where they retrain their body to get sleepy at the appropriate time, to sleep and stay asleep and to be awake. So we have so many external factors that are affecting this nowadays, all of the electronics, all of the artificial light. It's constantly feeding and telling our bodies, sending our bodies a message that it is awake time, it is daytime, it is stimulation time. We really need to take control of some of these things if we're going to get serious about getting better sleep. So how do we really know if we're not getting good quality sleep? Sometimes it's not as simple as just kind of intuitively knowing if you were awake during the night, that kind of thing. Sometimes we have to look at kind of what, or sometimes we think that we slept, and in fact, we may not have slept well. So, if you do have a hard time falling asleep, for example, that may be an indication that you kind of have a chronic sleep deprivation thing going on. And that seems like it would be the opposite, where you'd be exhausted and fall asleep, but that's actually a good sign that you're sleepy at the right time and you fall asleep when you go to bed. But having a hard time falling asleep can actually mean that we're overtired. You've probably heard people say they're so exhausted they can't sleep. And so that could be a sign of poor sleep quality ongoing. Daytime sleepiness, feeling like you don't have sustained energy, can't get through the day, can't not take a nap after lunch, that kind of a thing. That's not what we want during the day. We want to have sustained energy, be able to stay awake. Certainly this can be affected by other factors like caffeine or sugar or medications, but generally you want to start with maybe looking at, again, some of our sleep hygiene habits and assessing our quality of sleep. Lack of consistency in sleep quantity, frequent sleep disturbances, these are things that we probably know is happening during the night. If we know we're up needing to use the restroom a lot, or if our partner snores, that kind of thing. We're usually pretty aware of those things and, again, want to try to look at ways that we can improve those situations. So when we look at the effect on health and wellness, I think sometimes that we just think of the kind of cognitive impact or memory, focus, thinking clearly, maybe even our mood and that kind of a thing. But I don't think that we think of sleep in terms of how it might affect our physical body. And in fact, it has a great impact on our physical body. So obesity in adults and children, individuals with short sleep duration, less than 6 hours, were 7.5 times more likely to have a higher body mass index. And directly related to that, diabetes and impaired glucose tolerance. Adults who reported 5 hours of sleep or less were 2.5 times more likely to have diabetes compared with those who slept that 7 to 8 hour mark. Cardiovascular disease and hypertension, we're looking at a 45% increase in risk of a heart attack after adjusting for age, BMI, smoking, and snoring. So that's just very, very significant. And then we see several studies in adolescents specifically that found that inadequate sleep is associated with higher levels of depressed mood, anxiety, behavioral problems, alcohol use, and attempted suicide. So really, really important to look at this and to get on the right track and encourage your adolescent children or friends to pay attention to sleep starting at a young age and get into good, healthy habits. So here's a big one, all-cause mortality, or basically the reasons people die. I don't think that generally we're thinking about sleep in terms of death or increasing our likelihood of an early death, but sleep loss is in fact associated with increased age-specific mortality, according to 3 large population-based prospective studies. So these were large studies with 83,000 up to 1 million people followed for many years, 6 to 14 years, which is a really long time to be followed in a study. And deaths in short or long sleepers were compared with those who slept that kind of sweet spot, 7 hours, after adjusting for numerous health and demographic factors, and sleeping 5 hours or less actually increased your mortality risk from all causes by roughly 15%. So that's just hugely significant if you think about it. So this quote, in essence, sums up that last slide very nicely. Shorter your sleep, shorter your life. And we probably need to look at sleep again as one of the foundational pillars of good health, both physical, emotional, mental health. And Jaya is going to take over from here, talk about athletic performance, and then dig into some sleep hygiene tips.
Hi everyone, my name is Jaya. I'm a mental health counselor at MiraCosta. I'm going to be talking about the impact of sleep on athletics, mental health, and what you can do about it. So sleeping is not only important just generally for your physical body, but also has a real impact for athletic performance. So for example, sleeping allows our bodies to heal, reducing the inflammatory response, which naturally happens after we engage in physical activity. So we end up having faster recovery time with sleep. There's also a reduction of injury or rate of injury with sleep. So people that sleep less than 6 hours tend to have an increased rate of injury, and some research even indicates people with less than 8 hours of sleep, they're 70% more likely to report an injury. So injuries can really deter an athlete in their performance and even impair them to the point where they can't continue. So that's a really big one. There's also reaction time is affected with sleep. So, if you're really tired, you didn't get good sleep, then you're going to be fatigued. And the thing about that kind of tiredness and fatigue, it makes a very discernible impact on your reaction time. So if part of your athletic performance involves needing to, make a quick decision and react and respond to things quickly, whether it's jumping over things, whether it's catching things, throwing things, things of that nature, then having, bad sleep and whether that's bad quality or even just fewer hours can really slow your reaction time. And an all-nighter slows your reaction time about 300%. So there's a huge impact on that. There's also, accuracy is also very much affected. So if you're doing something, most athletic performances involve some sort of need for accuracy. That's going to be the difference between someone who is excelling and someone who's just kind of going through the motions. And, with less than 5 hours of sleep, there's a 53% decrease in accuracy. And this study was specifically looking at tennis, but can definitely be applied elsewhere. So, these are just some of the impacts of sleep on athletic performance. It's not the whole impact. There's more there that you can even look into, but these are some of the bigger ones that I think are really important. So, regarding the psychological or emotional impacts of sleep and its impact on our mental health, sleep in general is so important for our mental health that nearly all affective disorders, so any sort of mental health disorder that involves emotions, co-occur with sleep disturbances. So they're very much related. I often tell my clients that a good night's sleep can do more sometimes for them than a 15-minute counseling session with me. That sometimes it's really that powerful, to the point where even when I was doing crisis counseling, or even here when I'm doing crisis counseling or management, that some of the questions I'm going to ask is like, when was the last time you slept? And more often than not, people that are in crisis are largely not sleeping. So we know that their sleep and our emotions are very intertwined. And the areas of our brain related to processing emotional information, impulse control, and just kind of general regulation, all important for mental health. they decrease in activity with less sleep. Whereas areas involved with just experiencing emotions, especially negative emotions, so like fear, for example, are in overdrive with bad sleep. So what you have then is people are more vulnerable to being emotionally reactive, and we all kind of experience that when we don't have a good night's sleep. We tend, we could be cranky, right? But even to the extent where it's going to really impair us and impair our relationships. Um, so and that's because there's less ability to regulate and control when we experience an emotional event, stimulus, so we react very strongly. And we can also have very intrusive negative thoughts where we cannot put it down. So, that can really contribute to anxiety, depression, because the area of the brain involved with kind of these types of emotions are in overdrive. And we get a little bit fixated because we're not having those other areas to help us kind of regulate. So it also, lack of sleep exacerbates fearful responses, so we're coming from a place of more fear-based reactions. And if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, if your internal cognitive resources are low, you want to reserve whatever you have to protect yourself. So, the only way to do that is to watch out for negative things and react to them. And we talked about it's harder to manage emotions. Interesting enough, there's a lack of gratitude and empathy that people really experience. So, there was a study that looked at partners, and that even if one person in the partnership experienced um, less sleep or poor sleep, that both partners actually feel less sense of gratitude towards each other. So, and empathy is also affected as well. So you think about, the multi-layer effects of sleep. So there's a researcher named Matt Walker. You can look him up. He's got a really good podcast, or sorry, not podcast, TED Talk, and lots of books. Maybe he has a podcast, but he says that sleep is like mental health first aid, essentially, and that is such a big component, and we all kind of know it, but I don't think that we understand how important it is. So yeah, they're very much related. So the barriers to sleep, these barriers on this side are, applied to you if you're an athlete or not. But specifically for athlete, these factors have been studied in terms of like, these are barriers to sleep, which probably like, if you're an athlete, so you're going, yeah, absolutely. So we all know, stress is a big barrier to sleep. Being able to put that stress down, get to bed, can be really hard. And, if you're an athlete, you're having to manage school, your sport or athletics, maybe work, and then anything else personal life, whether it's family, friends, other relationships, and your needs. That's a lot of multiple things that you're juggling. And I think people, people often kind of underestimate the load, just like having to practice and keep up your ability, your physical ability can take on a person. And traveling, so if you're in a sport or doing a performance that requires you to travel any sort of, either for certain periods of time, certain seasons, or just kind of generally, that traveling, you cross different states, different time zones, and even just being in these new environments, all of that disrupts our internal clocks, our internal rhythms, which is so important for sleep, and can make it really hard to sleep. And then, of course, increased demand. So especially folks that have, say, some seasons that, okay, this is where, all my games are, or all my performances are. then those periods of time might be really hard to get sleep. And on top of that, our general culture, this grind kind of culture, push through, get through, be tough. In our society, we tend to really value these things about our culture and try to. We often see things like rest, relaxation, sleep, even as luxuries. Like, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead. We've all heard that before, and we internalize these messages, whether we ourselves really believe that or not. I think that's just a part of the cultural dialogue. So all of these are barriers to sleep. So I want to talk about sleep hygiene, what you can actually do about it. And so sleep hygiene is a series of practices and habits that cue your mind and body to relax and prepare for sleep. It's most effective when practiced daily. And then I'm going to go over some common tips. So sleep hygiene, essentially, we're training our mind and body to prepare for sleep. So if you think about it, when you wake up, if I ask you, what's your morning routine? Most people are going to have something. Like, I get up, I look at my phone, I brush my teeth, I get a cup of coffee, etc. Some people, if they don't feel like they have one, they know like other people that do. So we're very accustomed to having a routine to help wake us up, but thinking of that idea of a routine to help us wind down. Most people are like, wait, what? No, I don't do that. I do homework, I finish, or I stop for the day, brush my teeth, and get into bed, and I can't sleep. And so our bodies, there's no on and off switch really for these things. So it can be really hard when we don't have a time to transition into relaxation and sleep. And we really like routines. So routine is a huge part of regulating our internal system for sleep, for eating, for our mental health. So I'm going to go through the different aspects of sleep hygiene. And for athletes, I want you to think of sleep hygiene as a part of your training, not an obstacle to your training, but really take the time to do a sleep hygiene, or I call it a sleep care routine, as a part of your training, because of all the things we talked about earlier. It's going to improve your performance. So it's really, really essential. And I recommend having a sleep hygiene routine for when you're at home and you have, say, maybe more time and space. And if you do travel, having one that's adapted for traveling. So if you're an athlete, you might have 2 sleep hygiene routines. So the common tips that you will often get if you Google sleep hygiene are things like you want to limit naps. So limiting naps during the day is really important. If you can avoid a nap, that's great. However, if you're so exhausted and you just can't keep your eyes open, like your body might be saying, no, you need to rest. If you're not feeling well, also definitely sleep, but just generally kind of limiting naps. Caffeine intake, so limiting caffeine intake. If you drink your tea or coffee, before noon or before 2 p.m., generally then you're going to have an easier time going to bed because there's enough time for the caffeine to break down in your body to not have such an effect for going to bed. So it's not that you can't have caffeine, but you really want to be mindful when you're drinking it, also how much. So screen time is something that is really hard to do, especially right now. We really rely on screen time. So, things that you can do is just limiting it before bed. So when we think about our bedtime routine, we might want to think of one that doesn't involve a screen, if you're someone that's on a screen a lot. So this is, finding small ways we can reduce screen time is important. It doesn't need to be an all or nothing. You want to do something physical in your day. So generally, if you're an athlete and you might have a very strenuous routine already, and that's great. But yeah, being physical and having kind of regularity in that is really important. waking up and going to bed about the same time every day is so important, because again, that's training yourself to your mind and body that, okay, this is the time I rest and go to bed. And you want to aim for about 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Everybody's different, so this is an average. In general, this is what works for a large number of people, so it's an average. In terms of the going to bed the same time every day, so sometimes my clients will say, well, you know, what about weekends? I want to sleep in, I want to catch up. Well, there's a lot of mixed evidence about can you catch up on sleep. So it's not always going to be the best thing to kind of be sleep deprived during the week and then try to catch up on the weekend. It's better to kind of have that regularity. But you know, some people want to just sleep in a little bit on the weekend, so an hour is okay. So for example, I wake up about, say, 6 a.m., you know, Monday through Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday, I might wake up at 7 a.m. So I have like that extra hour. And you know, if you are getting good sleep, so not just lying in bed for that long, but actually getting restful sleep, that's generally what you need, unless you are, you know, feeling under the weather or your body just really needing extra. So have a comfortable sleeping environment, have a mattress, a pillow, you know, blankets that you like. Keep it on the cooler side. We tend to fall asleep better in an environment that's cooler, about 65 degrees. I'm a person that gets cold easily, so the way that I manage this is, you know, I might have extra blankets with me. I might have a blanket that I pull over myself and a blanket on my feet because I like that. But generally, like, our body temperature drops before sleep or when we're falling asleep. So this kind of helps it get into that space. Now, these are all kind of the physical things. One other thing that's not on here but that can be really important is also having a regular eating schedule. So again, routine, regularity is important for our bodies. So beyond kind of these kind of physical things that we can do, having a soothing bedtime routine is going to be huge for that stress barrier, for unloading the stress, and also for training your mind that this is the time where I'm starting to unwind, that I'm going to let go of everything else that came before me and everything else that's coming after me, that this period of time is really just for me. And again, you want to practice this like every day. So the first part of the soothing bedtime routine, you want to generally do this about 2 hours before bedtime is what I'd recommend. So like I mentioned, if you're creating 2 different routines, one's going to be at home, and maybe that's the one that's 2 hours before bedtime. One's going to be for when you're traveling, and that might be 1 hour before bedtime. So if I'm going to bed at midnight, I want to start at 10 p.m. So the first part, we want to think about helping ourselves gear into a more positive mindset, because when we are feeling some positive emotions, it helps us shift into a place of being at ease, and the body starts switching down into a different kind of rhythm internally or physiologically. It's going to help us get to sleep easier. So the first thing here is, I call it unload but don't process. So this is where you want to take everything that's in your mind and think about it as putting it outside of your mind, either to put it outside of your mind and get rid of, or put it outside of your mind to deal with later. So all your to-dos, like, oh, I need to do laundry, I need to pick up groceries, I have this homework assignment due, I need to email this person, writing that down in a planner or journal is going to be really important. So your mind doesn't have to keep it active and circulating so you don't forget. So even if you're someone like, oh, I remember things, that can be very true. You can be really good at remembering all the things you need to do, but know that does take energy. It is going to take resources mentally to help you remember. This is just a way to free up some of that resource. So that's more of the kind of pragmatic things, but we also want to do that for emotional things. So if there's something that's on your mind, a thought, a feeling, like I got in a fight with my friend today and I'm feeling really down about it, we want to write that out or get it out, maybe in a journal. And we don't want to spend time processing, meaning like getting into why that is and why I responded that way and what's this about and how do I make meaning. We want to just literally write it out. So I might write out fight with friend, and that's it. So for me, if I start getting into it, my mind's just going to get kicked out. If you really like journaling, you're someone that likes journaling, likes really processing through writing, that's a really important skill that should occur maybe earlier in the day. So this is not the same kind of thing. So that's one thing I think can be a little confusing. I think about it as my journal, my planner, they're my external hard drive. I don't need to keep things in my mind. Once you do that, do something fun. You can go on a walk, listen to a podcast, read, anything that feels, fun, enjoyable. Some people ask me, can I watch a show? The answer is yes. If you are doing this 2 hours before bedtime, yes, you can watch a show. You don't want to be and it also depends. If you're someone who is very sensitive to screens, then maybe not. Maybe you want to make sure before 10 p.m. you watched your show. If you're not super sensitive to screens, you can watch a show, but making sure that it does end 1 hour before you're actually going to bed. So I'm someone where I can watch a show or be on my phone, but it has to be at least 1 hour before bed. So there's a good hour, sometimes more, between screen time and when I actually go to bed. So that's something I highly recommend trying out. So the second part of your soothing bedtime routine is going to occur that second hour or 30 minutes before bedtime. This is where we're going to slow the mind and body. So you've unloaded your thoughts and feelings. It's time to slow down. We want to think of this as, how do we soothe ourselves? How do we soothe our body? Maybe it's gentle stretching. So think about postures that are more closed, not open. Open postures increase our heart rate. Closed postures slow it down. So thinking things like yin yoga, yoga nidra, or just gentle stretching. Drinking tea. So having herbal tea, not caffeinated tea, chamomile, hibiscus, mint, things of that nature can be really soothing. Maybe it's taking a hot shower, smelling essential oils. And if you're someone that's like, I don't actually know what suits my body, I just want you to then try it out. What feels right for you, what you enjoy. It doesn't need to be, you don't need to have identified it right away. You can also explore. And once you find it, you'll know. And the biggest thing here is, if you can't sleep, within about 15 to 20 minutes, get up and get out of bed, do something different. If you can go to another room, great, but the more time you spend awake in your bed, including during the day, so if you're doing homework on your bed, for example, the more time, or the more our minds connect being awake with our bed. So you want to separate that. Sometimes folks will tell me, well, I don't want to look at my clock. I think I actually flip my clock upside down so I can't see it. So how will I know it's been 15 or 20 minutes? In that case, anytime you just are awake enough or long enough where you're going, wait a minute, I'm awake, I can't fall asleep, you want to get up. So it doesn't need to be exact. So here are some resources for you to check out. There are some books here for you can look into. There's also there are many different sleep apps where you can explore and see what's there. There's the Sleep Score app that can kind of help track your sleep. There's this podcast called Trained. It's a Nike podcast, and the URL is on the slide. And it's about actually athletics performance, but they talk a lot about sleep. So that's something you can also look into.